be a secret to anybody that the president is going to want people both in the House and Senate that are going to help push forward policies that he supports and push forward policies and his agenda. In fact, Kellyanne's statement actually shows her intention and desire to comply with the Hatch Act, as she twice declined to respond to the host's specific invitation to encourage the people of Alabama to vote for that Republican. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
Are you saying that the allegation against the president has been true?
She ignored the last question. That's Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, wrapping up a fairly short White House briefing, about 25 minutes as far as briefing goes. I'm Trace Gallagher in for Shepard Smith. The White House saying the turnover inside the administration is perfectly normal, although it does rank higher than the 5 preceding administrations. Officials downplaying the resignation of President's chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, right? It's just the latest big name to leave the West Wing. Watch.
This administration has had a historic first year. We're going to continue to do great things. This is an intense place, as every White House, and it's not abnormal that you would have people come and go, but we're continuing to do great work. We're continuing to focus on the president's agenda, and that's what we're all here to do.
Word of Cohn's resignation coming less than a week after President Trump announced his planned tariffs on steel and aluminum, tariffs Cohn opposed. But the White House says his decision to leave has been in the works for a while. Here's a live look now at the Dow. It started down a while. Now you can see right there it's down about 120 points. And analysts say the drop was a reaction in part to Cohn's decision, maybe in part to the tariffs. Let's get to the chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. He's live for us inside the briefing room at the White House. Hello, John.
Trace, good afternoon to you. Probably a little bit of both. Remember last year when it looked like Cohn might leave over the Charlottesville reaction here at the White House, the markets dropped. Today, Cohn's departure may be an indication that the tariffs are on their way. So, yeah, the market's not feeling very good about that, though it's feeling better than it was earlier today when it was down more than 300 points. Sarah Sanders at the briefing today saying that the president already has a number of ideas of people who could replace Gary Cohn as the chief economic advisor. The president tweeting this morning, we'll be making a decision soon on the appointment of new chief economic advisor. Many people wanting the job will choose wisely. Actually, that tweet was issued last night, not this morning. Sorry about that. Tariffs were certainly at the center of Cohen's leaving. There was a meeting yesterday afternoon in the Oval Office that occurred after the president's press conference in which the president was seeking assurances from his closest advisors that everybody was on board with tariffs. Cohen, who has never supported the idea of tariffs, was not able to give his support, his stamp of approval to that. So that, as was described to me by several people at the White House, was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. There have been other things that Cohen has been worried about, though he did get through his 2 biggest items that he wanted to be involved in, that was tax reform and regulatory reform. But also looking at the landscape ahead, it looks like infrastructure is not going to go anywhere. So really what the president's agenda is going to be all about for the remainder of 2018 is rewriting these trade deals. And Gary Cohn doesn't think that these trade deals should be rewritten. He is a fierce free trader. He's a globalist and likes things the way they are. Certainly think could be tweaked around the edges. But the president is looking at the wholesale rewriting of some of these agreements. Still, Cohen got a good send-off from his colleagues here at the White House. Let's listen to a compilation of that.
He's been a terrific partner in working here on tax reform and other things. As you know, there was a lot of speculation after tax reform whether he'd stay or not, and Gary decided to move on.
So this is not about some sort of a palace coup. Gary, as you know from all kinds of media, has been contemplating some sort of a move for some little while.
This is something that Gary's been talking about for quite some time. One of the big goals he had coming into the administration was to help the president and lead the effort on historic tax cuts. We were able to do that at the end of last year.
And it appears as though Gary Cohn is going to be staying here for several weeks until a new economic advisor transitions in. We're also told there's a chance that he could come back into the administration. He has been on the short list for a cabinet appointment if and when one becomes open. And apparently Cohn is open to coming back should a cabinet position become available. Trace?
Yeah, and John, you asked about the tariffs specifically.
I did, because the EU has been very clever in threatening the president with retaliatory tariffs, goods that are produced in many swing states across the country, things that could hurt him politically if he goes ahead with the tariffs. I put that question to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, whether or not he was willing to weather that political hit. Listen here.
The president is prepared to protect our country. That is the #1 priority he has as president, is to protect our economic and national security interests, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders also said that the president was looking at specific carve-outs from the tariffs for certain countries, namely Canada, Mexico, maybe some others, for national security purposes, though no details about that at this point. Trace?
John, stand by. The adult film star who claims she had an affair with President Trump says the president and his lawyer tried aggressively to keep her quiet so he could win the election. Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, is suing to get rid of a non-disclosure agreement. She and her lawyer claim the agreement is null and void because the president never personally signed it. President Trump's lawyer has denied there was an affair. Let's go back now to John Roberts at the White House. John.
And you'll remember a number of years ago, Stormy Daniels gave an interview to In Touch magazine in which she said, yes, there was a sexual relationship between her and then businessman Donald Trump. But since then, she has been denying it. Her attorney, Michael Avenatti, went some distance down the road today in an interview to suggest that, well, those statements are false, that, yes, indeed, there was a sexual relationship between she and the president. When asked about it today, Sarah Huckabee Sanders denied it all. Listen here.
The president has addressed these directly and made very well clear that none of these allegations are true. This case has already been won in arbitration, and anything beyond that, I would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
When did the president address specifically the cash payment that was made in October of 2016?
The president has denied the allegations against him. And again, this case has already been won in arbitration. Anything beyond that, I would refer you to outside counsel.
Did he know about that payment at the time, though?
I've addressed this as far as I can go.
But that payment, did he know about the payment at the time?
Not that I'm aware of. And again, anything beyond what I've already given you, I would refer you to the president's outside counsel.
The payment that was referred to there was a payment of $130,000 to Stormy Daniels. Stephanie Clifford is her real name. In the closing weeks of the 2016 election campaign, Michael Cohen, the president's personal attorney, said that he made that payment in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement that was signed by Clifford, signed by Clifford's attorney, signed by Michael Cohen, was notarized, and she accepted the payment. But now she's trying to say that that non-disclosure agreement is null and void because the president himself didn't sign it. The president, according to Michael Cohen, had no knowledge of this agreement, but Michael Avenatti, who is Stormy Daniels' attorney, said there's no way the president couldn't have known about it. Listen here.
There's no question the president knew about it at the time. The idea that an attorney would go off on his own without his client's knowledge and engage in this type of negotiation and enter into this type of agreement, quite honestly, I think is ludicrous.
Now, one potential hole in Stormy Daniels' argument here is at the very top of the non-disclosure agreement. It says that it is on behalf of a front company that Michael Cohen created to pay her and or a pseudonym for Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels. So it may be that the president didn't need to sign it in order to make this thing valid. Stormy Daniels has said she would be happy to give back the $130,000 she was paid if she is free to go public with her story. Because that non-disclosure agreement provides for $1 million penalty for every breach of it. So if she were to go out there and say, yes, indeed, this relationship was like this, she could get fined $1 million under that agreement. Trace?
It's a good incentive. John Roberts, live for us at the White House. John, thank you. Now more on the latest staff shakeup at the White House and what we just heard at the briefing. Let's bring in A.B. Stoddard. She is the associate editor and columnist at Real Clear Politics. She is also host of No Labels Radio on Sirius XM. A.B., great to see you. The White House, of course, says, no, this is all in the working process. I mean, he was going to do this for weeks. There was no individual incident. Boy, if timing is everything, the timing here says that a lot of this had to do with the tariffs.
Oh, absolutely. We've heard accounts that Gary Cohn, obviously has opposed this for a very long time and has been arguing strenuously about the benefits of free trade, the harm and injurious effects of tariffs to the president. And then he thought he had held him, obviously, at bay over all these months. But after the tax reform package passed, the president was intent on doing this. The way that it unfolded last week was also very chaotic. it was kept a secret from Gary Cohn, and Gary Cohn was trying to bring some stakeholders to the White House later this week to plead their case with the president, people who are industries that are end users of aluminum and steel who will have to potentially lay off people or raise their prices, tax the consumers, and apparently the president went ahead and canceled that. So, you know, this is what the White House does. They say it's an intense job, it's no problem, nothing to see here, we have qualified people coming on in, but nearly 40% turnover is exceptional and it's disruptive.
Yeah, and they say it's a brain drain. Yeah, the brain drain from the White House. And the White House, you just heard Sarah Sanders saying, but really the 5 preceding administrations, this is higher than any of those administrations. And, you know, it used to be these White House jobs were coveted because they lead to these lucrative jobs in the private sector. And now you've got these worries about unless you get legally bankrupted in the process.
Yeah, this has become an undesirable place to work because of the high turnover, because of the tumult, because of the potential that you'll be exposed in the Russian investigation to conversations and therefore be talking to the special counsel and will incur steep personal legal fees. This is not a place where people want to work if Gary Cohn is leaving, if H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, is leaving, if General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, is leaving, if Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is leaving. This is not a place where people want to work if everybody is fleeing. I don't think Hope Hicks matters. She was never really running communications. She was calming the president down. He is the communications director. They have very capable spokespeople there in Hogan Gidley and Raj, and as well as Sarah. They're going to be fine with people coming and answering questions of reporters at the briefing. But in terms of someone like a national economic advisor and people weighing in on national security, that's very worrisome that people who are the best and the most qualified are leaving.
What'd you make of this whole Stormy Daniels back and forth at the briefing, AB? Because, I mean, Sarah Sanders dismissed it very quickly a couple of different times.
Well, it's very interesting because for the first time today, we heard that the president prevailed in an arbitration proceeding that we have not heard about before. And I just read on the internet that Stormy Daniels' lawyer says, oh, yeah, and he also won the popular vote. So there's some discrepancy there. But, you know, it's very interesting the way that Sarah Huckabee Sanders protects herself by answering and says things about the payment, you know, not that I'm aware of, but also the way that Michael Cohen, the president's personal lawyer, has said, I facilitated a payment. He uses lawyerly descriptions to describe what that payment, what that transfer was all about. And, you know, obviously it looks on the surface of it that the president or then candidate well knew that it was a payment to quiet her.
Right. A.B. Stoddard, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the United States versus California, the Trump administration targeting the state over its so-called sanctuary laws, accusing California of ignoring the Constitution. Now California's governor is federal immigration law and violate the U.S. Constitution.
California absolutely appears to me is using every power it has, powers it doesn't have, to frustrate federal law enforcement. So you can be sure I'm going to use every power I have to stop that. We are going to fight these irrational, unfair, unconstitutional policies that have been imposed on you and your officers, on our federal officers.
California Governor Jerry Brown, a Democrat, referred to the lawsuit as a political stunt. It's already sparking protests. This was the scene right outside the hotel where Sessions spoke. Let's get live to Claudia Cowan. She's there in Sacramento now. Claudia, the lawsuit takes aim at 3 laws in particular here.
That's right, Trace. 3 newly enacted laws that strictly limit the ability of federal immigration authorities to do their jobs. Now, the main issue at stake, the big law that we're talking about here, SB 54, prohibits police from asking people about their immigration status and from participating in federal enforcement raids. Another gives state officials power over detention facilities run by the Department of Homeland Security, in essence enabling the state to regulate the federal government. And the third law offers protection against workplace raids. Jeff Sessions equated these sanctuary policies with an open border policy.
It cannot be the policy of a great nation to up and reward those who unlawfully enter its country with legal status, Social Security, welfare, food stamps, work permits, and so forth. And open borders is a radical, irrational idea that cannot be accepted. The American people will not accept it.
Sessions also took aim at Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf for publicly warning illegal immigrants that a massive enforcement raid last month was imminent. Sessions said that her actions, quote, needlessly endanger the lives of law enforcement just to promote a radical open borders agenda. And the White House has confirmed that the Justice Department is looking into whether Mayor Schaaf may have violated any laws. Trace?
And on the flip side, Claudia, the response by California's top politicians was pretty equally harsh.
Well, there is no love lost between these two sides. As you mentioned, California Governor Jerry Brown called the DOJ's lawsuit a, quote, political stunt. He and the state's attorney general held a press conference right after Jeff Sessions finished speaking here over at the state capitol, and they blasted the Trump administration for failing to enact immigration reform and trying to punish California for refusing to cooperate with federal enforcement authorities.
This is a very aggressive act on the part of the Trump administration, and it's not right. It won't stand. And as I say, I'm sure this lawsuit has more longevity than the Trump administration itself.
Governor Jerry Brown, he is vowing to fight this lawsuit, but the Justice Department is reportedly now looking at other states that haven't enacted these so-called sanctuary policies. They could face possible legal action as well. Trace?
Claudia Cowan live for us in Sacramento. Claudia, thank you. Some important primary races just wrapping up and possibly kind of giving us a preview of the midterm elections. The big question now, can Democrats take traditional red states, maybe even Texas? We'll talk.
A brawl breaking out on a Southwest Airlines flight. The plane was getting ready to take off from Dallas and fly to Los Angeles. Well, someone had to use a chokehold to take down the man throwing punches. The fight apparently delayed passengers for about an hour. A suspected drunk driver hit himself with his own car while trying to get away from police. This happened in Fairfax County, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. Cops say the man bailed out at a dead end and then ran in front of his car while it was still moving. Well, after he got up, an officer arrested him. Investigators say this is his third drunk driving offense. And California rolling out its first driverless bus in San Ramon, that's just outside of San Francisco. A dozen people can fit inside the bus, but it's...
European nations coming up with a list of U.S. products they may target with tariffs after President Trump announced plans to tax aluminum and steel imports. The trade commissioner at the European Union said they want to respond as quickly as possible. And some items on the list so far include Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Levi's jeans, and bourbon. Yesterday, President Trump signaled he may be willing to negotiate with European countries if they are willing to ease some of the current tariffs on the United States. The Fox Business Network's Hillary Vaughn is live for us on Capitol Hill. And Hillary, what are Democrats saying about these tariffs?
Trace, well, some Democrats are on board with these tariffs or the idea of it, but not everyone is sold. I talked with Senator Ron Wyden, a Democrat, who says that he's waiting for a little bit more clarity on these proposals. He's waiting until something is more set in stone, but he thinks that the president using the threat of tariffs to negotiate a fairer NAFTA deal with U.S. neighbors is misguided.
He still really doesn't understand the guts of the problem, which is overcapacity of steel in China. Part of what he's done in the last couple of days suggests that somehow he thinks the target ought to be Canada or Europe or somebody else. The big challenge here is the overcapacity of steel in China.
Senator Joe Manchin, who's been another Dem in the president's corner over this, says he thinks that the president is on the right track with these negotiations.
I think the president and his advisors will look at it. You know, I know we're concerned about Canada, and I'm sure those adjustments will be made accordingly. But there's no doubt about it.
Manchin saying all you have to do. China is the big problem here, Trace.
And Republicans, Hillary, are also pushing back, right?
Right, Trace. Well, Speaker Paul Ryan kind of warming up to the idea of tariffs, but still calling for a targeted and surgical approach. But two key lawmakers that led the charge on tax cuts are now leading the charge against tariffs. Senator Orrin Hatch and Representative Kevin Brady. Hatch writing a letter to the White House asking for them to reconsider, and Brady saying this morning that he thinks Trump's approach is the problem here.
Where we're at in a lot of Republicans in the House is, look, Mr. President, go after the bad actors. We're with you. Protect the good ones because that protects our jobs. And so we're going to keep having that discussion with him.
But not all Republicans agree on this. I talked moments ago with Senator Shelby from Alabama. He says if Trump's playing the long game here and it works, he doesn't see a problem with this strategy.
I don't know if it's the wrong way to go. What's right or wrong is what works. We'll see what works. If it doesn't work, it's the wrong way to go. But sometimes you have to get people's attention. We are losing out in the trade war. Let's be honest. The question is it our fault? Is it the trade fault? Is it because countries are dumping steel and aluminum on this country to the detriment of our own people? We need to figure it out. This is a good time to start.
Trace, there is a bit of a middle ground here. I talked to Republicans and Democrats today who agree that cheap Chinese steel is a problem, but how to handle that problem is the sticking point. Trace?
Hillary Vaughn live for us on Capitol Hill. Hillary, thank you. More Democrats voting in the Texas Senate race last night than in any midterm primary in more than 20 years. But Republicans actually set a new midterm primary turnout record. Some conservatives have said they're worried about the challenges from Democrats in the traditionally red state, but analysts say they expect the GOP to hang on to all statewide offices in November. Let's bring in our panel. Christy Setzer is a Democratic strategist, the president and founder of New Heights Communications, and
a couple districts in which we now know Texas will send a Latina woman to Congress because it was, heavily Democratic districts where a Latina woman won. We also know that a record number of women coming by and large from Democrats, from women, and to some extent